Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into a really fascinating message called A New Departure. This was a statement from the leadership of the Family Federation, you probably know them as the Unification Church, and it was delivered to their followers right after a Japanese court ordered them to dissolve.
Wow. I mean, this one sentence just paints a picture, doesn't it? It perfectly captures the absolute chaos and shock of March 4th, 2026. A top leader used these exact words to describe a day that started with a plan and ended with the organization losing control of everything in just a matter of hours.
So, let's set the scene. The day began with the church's leadership team all ready to go. Their plan was to analyze the court's ruling, figure out the response, and then put out a formal statement. But that plan? It was completely, and I mean instantly, blown out of the water.
The whole thing moved with this incredible, almost military-like precision. The very moment the court's order came down, liquidators were already on the phone demanding a meeting. And get this, while the leadership was being pulled into that first meeting, before they've even had a chance to read the verdict, agents were showing up at facilities all across the country. By that evening, staff were being told to pack up their personal things and just leave.
Now you might be wondering, why was this so shocking? Well, it all comes down to precedent. The leadership was looking at the Shinrikyo case, which was another huge, high-profile dissolution. In that case, there was a full one-day gap between the court order and any action. So they expected at least a few hours to respond. Instead, they got absolutely nothing. Zero.
And the scale of this operation was just immense. We're not talking about a handful of buildings. Over 200 locations were visited all at the same time, which really suggests a high level of pre-planning for an outcome that, at least from the church's point of view, was definitely not a sure thing. So in the middle of all this chaos, with their websites and all their assets immediately frozen, the church leadership couldn't even publish their prepared response. This left them completely scrambling to get their side of the story out to their own members.
In his message, the leader actually took the time to read out parts of the press release that never really saw the light of day. It laid out 5 core objections that they believe just completely undermined the entire legal basis for their dissolution.
Okay, so their main argument was basically that the court didn't rely on hard proof, but on inference. They also claimed the legal goalposts were suddenly moved and then applied backwards in time, and that all their internal reform efforts were totally ignored. You combine that with a trial held behind closed doors and, well, they framed the whole decision as a major violation of religious freedom.
But, it wasn't all just about these dense legal arguments. The statement then pivoted to something deeply personal. They weren't just worried about losing their legal status. They were terrified about what this would mean for their members in their everyday lives. And they used this very specific term, social stigma.
And this right here, this was their appeal directly to the public. Their argument is that even though the ruling is against the corporate organization, it risks branding every single follower, including second and third generation members, as outcasts, creating a climate where discrimination could be seen as justified.
So with all their legal and PR avenues basically cut off, the message shifts, and I mean it shifts dramatically. The focus turns inward, away from the courts and towards the spirit. This is the moment where a legal defeat is strategically reframed as a theological challenge for all their followers.
First things first, the leader addressed some media speculation head-on. You see, when he said they would continue their activities, some reports took that as an act of defiance. He had to clarify, no. This means continuing our faith activities, all within the bounds of the law while we fully cooperate with the liquidation process itself.
And this became the new rallying cry. The central message was that what looks like a total defeat from our human perspective is actually part of a much larger divine plan. The idea is that history is filled with moments that look like total failure at the time, but were actually crucial turning points.
And to really drive this point home, they drew on some really powerful stories from the Bible. You've got Joseph being sold into slavery, David hiding in a cave, even Jesus being crucified. In every single one of these cases, the moment of greatest despair was actually the prelude to an ultimate victory. And this is the lens through which they urged their followers to see what was happening to them right now.
This message, coming directly from the movement's global leader, Hak Jahan Moon, really cemented the narrative. It positioned their current hardship not as some kind of punishment or an ending, but as the very soil from which a new chapter of their history would grow. It's a classic religious theme, right? Resurrection from suffering.
So, if this is a new departure, what does that actually look like on the ground? Well, the message ended with a very clear set of instructions and observations for members who were trying to navigate this totally new reality.
First off, there was an assessment of morale. The leader acknowledged that, of course, people were anxious and confused. That's totally natural. But he also expressed genuine surprise and gratitude that what he was hearing back from many members wasn't despair, but this resilient, almost energetic spirit.
And then he gave 4 really concrete directives. First, comply peacefully, and he noted with pride that there wasn't a single incident of trouble anywhere in the country. Second, continue your personal faith. Third, support each other, and even use humor to get through it. And then the fourth one, which was a truly remarkable pivot.
This was the final and maybe the most powerful instruction. He told his followers to shift their focus away from their own problems. They were to reframe themselves not as victims of Japan, but as spiritual caretakers who needed to pray for the very nation whose government had just dissolved their organization.
So, to quickly recap this internal message, the absolute shock of the dissolution's speed was met with a legal counter-argument that basically never got aired. This crisis was then transformed into a narrative of a spiritual trial, and the path forward was defined by peaceful compliance, strong community, and this new mission to pray for the nation.
And all of this leaves us with a really fascinating question for the future. By losing its legal and corporate structure, the group is now forced to exist purely as a movement of faith. And how that faith community manages to endure, evolve, or maybe even thrive without a formal organization, well, that's a story that is just beginning.